Needless to say, there are many answers to these questions in India, and many variations on the Lakshmi ritual and the Lakshmi myth and its ritual enactment. For the people of Bastar and Eastern India more generally, she is rice personified, but not obviously for the people of the dry zones where wheat and millet prevail. It follows that rice is a secondary symbol of Lakshmi, and the Lakshmi Jagar epic is a variation on this all-India theme. A variation, by definition, presupposes a general theme. But what is this general all-India mythical theme about Lakshmi? What is her primordial botanical symbol? What conception of wealth does this botanical symbol personify? And what distinguishes Lakshmi from the other 333 million goddesses that make up the Hindu pantheon? Not an easy question. Now, these questions are not easy ones to answer because the visual, oral and written ritual evidence available is quite simply overwhelming. There's far too much of it. The very first problem we have with the goddess Lakshmi is her name. Some sources list Lakshmi's 101 names, others her 1001 names. Always must end in a 1, of course. The ancient Sanskrit hymns about her many names, which are still chanted today, define her essence by means of distinctive qualities that different names give, and which they suggest for a Sanskrit speaker. These include granter of good wishes, wisdom, sinless, and so on. But as we go through the list, certain themes begin to emerge. I quote again, lover of lotus, having lotus-like hands, lotus-eyed, beautiful like a lotus. There are many other names that are based upon the lotus, which gives us our first clue as to her defining characteristic of Lakshmi, because here is a plant whose morphology is a key to understanding her essence. This remarkable aquatic plant is native to India, just like Lakshmi is, and it is her primordial symbol. It is the invariant symbol in the ethnography of all times and places, as we can see here. The popular iconography associates Lakshmi with material wealth of different kinds, gold, money, ledgers, rice. But the lotus on which Lakshmi sits is always there. Zimmer has traced the cultural morphology of this symbol from its origins in pre-Vedic times, 3,000-4,000 years ago, and it's spread from Hindu India to Buddhist Asia. And the analysis of this plant epitomises will be the subject of my next week's lecture. For today, it suffices to note that lotus plants live in water, and that Lakshmi, like all plants and people, needs water to survive and reproduce them. Water, then, is one of the answers to the mysteries of life. It is the supreme form of wealth. Without water, we cannot exist, a point so obvious that we tend to forget it. The myths and rituals and iconography about Lakshmi serve to remind Hindus of this elementary fact. But Lakshmi is not water. Her mother is. Water is the mother of wealth. Here then we see our first departure from the values of European political economy, where political economists of all persuasions quote William Petty's 17th century proposition that, quote, labour is the father and active principle of wealth, and lands are the mother. This argument, I contend, is another classic example of a wheat-centric argument. Not wrong, but simply limited. It is certainly true that land is a primary mother of wealth in Europe, but in monsoon Asia, where rice takes its nutrients mainly from water, water is the primary mother of wealth. Rice can grow on the same land year after year, season after season, without rest. But not. What's crucial is that the water supply is maintained and there's a throughput of water, but not wheat. Land is the mother of wheat, and it has to be rested, fertilised, turned over, left and by a special furrow plough, so that the earth can recover. Myths about Lakshmi then privileged the use value of water. This much is signified by Lakshmi's association with elephants, we can see, I think, in one of those slides, who spray Lakshmi with water. In the poetic imagination of the Guru-Mahas of Bastar, water, the elephant, is the monsoon rain cloud and the mother of Lakshmi. She's also called Mengin. The elephant is named Irawati, and the Burmese have the same goddess, and they name their main river after her, the Irrawaddy, a slight variation. It is in the many stories that are told about Lakshmi and her family that all these names and plants and animals come together to tell a coherent tale. But again, the diversity of the oral and written evidence suggests incoherence. At the one extreme, we have this 30-line Vedic poem written about 3,000 years ago, and the other extreme, this 31,000-line epic from Bastar, which is current today. The two poems could not be more different. Vedic hymns are chanted in Sanskrit by high-classed Brahmin men, and every performance must be sung exactly as before, according to strict rules about an invariant rhyme, rhythm and content. The Bastar epic, by contrast, is sung in Halbi by low-caste women, and the tunes and melody and storyline vary from one village to another as we move across the Bastar Plateau. Despite these maximal differences in time, place and language, caste and gender, we can spot the general mythical theme that it informs these ritual performances. I just quote 3 stanzas from this 3,000-year-old epic. I banish Alakshmi, the elder sister, squalid with hunger, shrunken and thirst. All poverty and misery must be gone from my home. I invoke the goddess Lakshmi, who reveals herself through scent and through the inexhaustible blessings of cattle. Exceeded by none, she is the majestic sovereign of all creatures. Draw unto me, O sacred fire, O Agni, that goddess Lakshmi, this constant one, upon whose arrival I shall be blessed with abundant gold, abundant cattle, attendants, horses, and loyal friends. Here then, I think, is a simple variation on the simple story that I began this lecture with. Lakshmi is a goddess of good fortune. When she dwells with you in your house, she brings wealth and happiness, but she is a fickle goddess who is intolerant of vice and domestic discord. When she leaves, her place is taken by Alakshmi, the goddess of misfortune and misery. Every year, in the wet season, rituals are held to invite Lakshmi into one's home. And these welcome ceremonies are performed by female heads and in some cases by kings who want their kingdoms to flourish. This general form of the moral philosophy of wealth allows for endless variations, and if different peoples in different times conceive of wealth, poverty, good fortune and virtue in different ways. And it's even the basis for the modern Clean Up India campaign. This is a 5-second, I can give those who are interested, there's a YouTube video, and this YouTube video features some of Bollywood's most famous actors, and these depict, and it starts off with a person there who worshipping Lakshmi, and then she goes and throws rubbish away, and she comes back and finds that Lakshmi is not there. So in other words, the story goes, it is said that the goddess of happiness and prosperity resides only where there is cleanliness. So the defining virtue is cleanliness. It is surprising where on the one hand we worship Lakshmi, on the other hand we throw rubbish and litter the country. So brother and sister, before you spread your rubbish next time, please think, lest Lakshmi gets upset and leaves you. So let me now try and sum up the general mythology that defines Lakshmi. Again, it's an extremely simple tale, and the whole advantage of extremely simple tale allows for endless variation, just like the octave on a piano allows for endless variation. And so we can see then that there is based on key oppositions. Wealth versus poverty on the one hand, fortune versus morality on the other. Lakshmi as a goddess of good fortune brings wealth and happiness, but her presence presupposes virtuous conduct. Her elder sister, Alakshmi, the goddess of misfortune, is attracted by vice and strife and she moves in when Lakshmi leaves, bringing with her poverty and misery. Now, good fortune and misfortune are existential facts of the human condition, along with wealth and poverty. So too are the vices such as theft and murder, which via the principle of antithesis, define virtues of various moral and ethical legal systems. It comes as no surprise then to find that the variants of the Lakshmi myth has grown in Europe, and many other scholars have done. But perhaps the best illustration of the general relationship between morality and fortune comes from the Proverbs. I quote, "Fortune is the companion of virtue," goes one Latin proverb. "Fortune is fickle and soon asks back what it has given," goes another. And Goethe says, "It never occurs to fools that merit and good fortune are closely related." In other words, we can make good luck happen by being virtuous. The pursuit of wealth and happiness then is a moral quest rather than a narrowly defined economic one. It involves values of a religious, familial and economic kind. Values for their part do not exist in a vacuum. Valuers have valuers. Valuers are persons from different classes, statuses and gender whose values are shaped by their times and place. Herein lies the source of variations in myth about Lakshmi. As Marshall Mouse noted in his, said the ethnographer must pay attention to the differences between moral environments. Court morality is not popular morality. Women's morality is not men's morality, and the morality of the old is not the morality of the young. He also noted that the morality of a society can be studied by its literature, which is precisely my concern over these next 6 weeks. Let me now try and sum up the argument so far and to outline what is to come. The Hindu myths about Lakshmi give us a common fourfold definition of wealth. Each of these has its valued subcategories that vary according to the social status of the valuer. First comes human wealth in the form of progeny, sons and daughters. Next comes material wealth with many subcategories, the main ones being food, clothing and shelter, gold and money, water, land, capital, tools and servants. Third comes social wealth in the form of fame and friendship and social status. Finally, there is bodily wealth in the form of good health and long life. All of these different forms of wealth are highly valued in India, and people's quest for them motivates the narrative in the Lakshmi Jagar epic. Wealth in this fourfold sense is not restricted to India, of course. And if you look at a dictionary of wealth, we find that some of these other non-material items are listed as now archaic forms. And indeed, in English, sometimes we refer to wealth in this more narrow, broader sense. So our whole conception of wealth, thanks to the political economists, has become very, very narrow and focused on capital rather than wealth in this more general sense. As we have seen, the Lakshmi Jagar epic then is a story of the moral pursuit of wealth and happiness in the form. It's an allegorical tale of everyday life of people that abounds in poetic imagery. Lakshmi is wealth in general, but like all Hindu deities, she can assume a multitude of forms. Her primordial form is the lotus, and the story of the lotus is the story of wealth in the form of progeny. This is the theme of my next week's lecture, and we find that children are the most important wealth in India. When I asked Guru Mai Sukdai what wealth was, she answered instantly, children. In other parts of India, they would say sons, especially in the Western India, where it's a wheat-growing area. And we find fascinating, if you look at the statistics, demographic statistics, you find in the West there's female infanticide by amniocentesis. But in the eastern zone, where you have rice growing, the balances are the same. And it's interesting that all the stories of Lakshmi come from this eastern zone. An interesting paradoxical feature of Lakshmi worship, then, it is a celebration of the supreme value of daughters. And this is the interesting thing about it. And as I said, this is correlated with the fact that the richest sort of sacred poetry about Lakshmi is found in the rice-eating areas of eastern India. And it deals, I think, with the higher valuation of females in the rice production process. In these epics, we find that the story of wealth in the material form is a story of rice. And this will be the subject of my third lecture. The story of wealth in the form of fame and friendship is a story of Lakshmi as a bride. Friendship is very highly valued in Bastar and India more generally. So too is fame. In the epic, we find that the desire to have one's name remembered motivates the virtuous actions of people. Weddings are occasions when one's generosity is on display and no expense must be spared in marrying off one's son or daughter in grand style. Paradoxically, the pursuit of wealth in this social kind renders people poverty-stricken in the material kind. Weddings are the biggest industries, one of the biggest industries in India, but also one of the greatest causes of indebtedness. This will be the subject of my last lecture. Wealth in the form of good life and long life is Lakshmi herself, but she is immortal. The people of Bastar believe that one can achieve immortality, and ancestors return in the form of spirits that possess mediums. The world of the living is heavily populated with spirits of the dead who are consulted on a regular basis. Lakshmi doesn't need a medium to mark her presence. The amount of rice in the granary is a measure of this. The story of Lakshmi, of wealth in the form of the lotus and rice and bride, is a story of her metamorphosis from her beginnings as a fetus in her mother's womb, her birth as a baby, her flowering as a young woman, and finally her wedding as a wife. This is the endpoint for Lakshmi. She is savagely beaten by her husband, half marries the goddess of death, and is reborn the following year. So in other words, she's not a mother goddess, she's primarily a daughter goddess. She's a daughter goddess rather than a mother goddess, and the tale of her mother's attempts to get pregnant in this very long and complicated one. Indeed, Lakshmi is not born until halfway through the epic, about 15,000 lines it takes. And this is the story of the mango and of Irawati the elephant, also known as Mengan, the rain goddess. But who is the father of Lakshmi? This is the secret of the epic, accessible only to those who are not fooled by the surface structure of the epic. The deep structure, accessible only to those who can decode its myths and symbols. And for those of you who hang around, you'll be able to hear in about 3 weeks' time. The epic tale then is very simply complex, and this kinship chart captures the simplicity of the complexity. Needless to say, the kinship relations are a little bit more complex than this, but I don't want to scare you off. The complexity arises because of the personification of sacred poets use are not abstract qualities, but of persons whose relationships are sung about using the idiom of Halbi kinship. This enables singers to get some order to the 330 million gods that constitute the Hindu pantheon. I'd now like to just conclude this lecture with a short advertisement for my next week's lecture and a brief note about Guru Mai Sukdai, the singer of this epic that I know best. She's an incredibly humble woman who is very wise and knowledgeable with an extraordinary memory. Indeed, when I asked her, "How do you remember all these songs?" and she looked at me and said, "How do you always forget things?" Because I'm always writing things down. It's absolutely extraordinary. But she earns no money from this singing, and she survives by weeding rice in the wet season and making mud bricks in the dry. From the point of view of the rich, she is landless and therefore poor. From the point of view of the Brahmins, she is low caste and therefore impure. From the point of view of the educated, she has no schooling and therefore illiterate. From the point of view of husbands, she has no sons and therefore barren. From the point of view of men in general, she is a widow and therefore inauspicious. But the values embodied in this epic she sings give us a very different perspective on life. They're not revolutionary in the sense that they do not contradict or overturn the dominant male values. She simply ignores them and articulates her own values that enable women like her to cope with every day-to-day life. Now, what is extraordinary about these epics is these songs by women like her have been totally ignored by anthropologists up to now, including, it has to be said, the Subaltern Studies School. who are more concerned with studying dead German philosophers and dead living French philosophers, which is nothing wrong with that, but I think we need to give respect to these people, equal respect. So, in fact, my colleague and Harihara Vashnu and I were the first to transcribe and require this epics, and over the next few weeks I'll give you a preliminary interpretation of them, and I look forward to your questions and critiques. Now, my last trip to Bastar, I was accompanied by my daughter Melanie, who was a midwife. She and Guru Mai exchanged lots of tales about menstruation, pregnancy and childbirth in India and Australia. They also discussed the symbolism of the lotus, which up until now had completely eluded me. At the conclusion of this conversation, my daughter said, "The symbolism of the lotus is obvious, Dad. You just have to take the perspective of a midwife." And midwives in India are the lowest of their low, the untouchables of the untouchable. And in my lecture next week, I'll suggest that this obvious interpretation has eluded many because of their unwillingness, both of insiders and outsiders, to take the point of view of the lowest of the low. Finally, I should say the lotuses are about to bloom in the palm garden. For those of you possessed of Goethe's spirit, a scientific and poetic spirit, you may like to spend some time contemplating the daily metamorphosis of the lotus flower as it arises and passes away. This, I suggest, will enable you to appreciate why this remarkable flower has inspired the poetic imaginations of billions of Asians over thousands of years. But if you want to understand the obviousness of its symbolism, I suggest you take a midwife with you or come to my lecture next week. Thank you.